All right. So thanks again for joining us. For those of you who just joined, welcome to our show. Sorry about the slight delay. What we'll be talking about today is how our wonderful guest built real UX work experience, strong case studies, and got hired in a tough market. So, as I mentioned, we have invited an awesome guest for you, who is a senior professional, UX professional by now, who will share lots of insights with you and answer your questions. So we'll introduce our wonderful guest in just a few minutes. For those of you joining us for the first time, my name is Michael, and I'm the founder of a company called BeginX. What we do is we help people who know UX basics or fundamentals and want to transition into UX. Our program is a part-time UX career accelerator with real mission-driven client projects that provides a guaranteed way to become highly marketable and land a UX role. And unlike most traditional programs or boot camps, we allow our participants to build real experience, strong real client portfolio, crucial soft UX skills like UX team collaboration, client and stakeholder management and presentation, and master the UX job search and interviewing necessary to actually land a UX role, all in a collaborative and fun environment and under the guidance of industry practitioner mentors from top companies. And I don't mean this to brag or anything like that, but just want to give you a bit of a background for credibility purposes. The company was started in New York City, and we have run many virtual cohorts and helped around 160 people or so get hired into UX roles. And we'll tell you a bit more about the virtual program and also make a special announcement closer to the end of the event. Of course, that part is completely optional for you. Now, let's get to the most fun part and introduce our awesome guest, and then we'll jump into the interview. So, Mitchell, so great to have you here. Thanks again for joining us. I'm really excited to have the discussion with you because I know you have an impressive background and you're like one of the most hardworking participants we had in the program, I think. So really excited to talk to you about this. Would you like to briefly introduce yourself to our audience?
Definitely. Yeah. So, hi, everyone. I'm Mitchell. I live in Washington, D.C. Very glad to be here. I'm sure we'll go into even more of my background, but I studied economics and computer science back in college, graduated during the pandemic, came out of it, started working as a data analyst, didn't love that, and then transitioned to UX via BeginX and met Michael then. Um, Move forward 5 years. I now work with someone at Capital One and she also went to BeginX. So it's kind of crazy that that we ended up in the same place together. So the network really does matter. And then of course we both ended up in a great role that we're really happy with, all thanks to the foundations that we got from BeginX. So huge props to that. And yeah, I'm excited to answer all and any questions as they come because I know how hard the UX journey is and how much work it takes, especially at the beginning. So
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Mitchell, and I appreciate the kind words. So that's really awesome to hear. And also, by the way, just for everyone, right? So I know even though Mitchell is one of our alumni, right, we're going to explore his entire story and kind of explore how he did, how he accomplished the results that he did, right? So you could accomplish it with the program or without the program, right? So you will kind of try to get into the details of the case studies, of the experience building, job search, etc., right? So to ensure that you can get it done as well. Because I know it's a tough market right now, and so I'm gonna help you navigate through that. All right. And by the way, again, if you guys have a question, please use that wonderful Q&A tab. So this way you can also upvote others' questions, and we make sure that we address the most popular ones that many people are interested in. And please also try to ensure that the questions are related to the topic, so that will be helpful as well. So specifically to experience building and case studies, getting hired, tough market, etc. And just a quick reminder, we'll make that special announcement about the program that we're running closer to the end of the event. And we'll also share the career transition roadmap summary handout. So stick around if you would like to get that. All right. So, Mitchell, let's start from the beginning. What were you doing? I know you already mentioned that briefly, but tell us maybe a little bit more. What were you doing before you decided to transition into UX, and why did you decide to make this transition?
Yeah, so I was working in DC as a data analyst for a really small data science consultancy startup. They're still technically open, but they're called Human Behavior. And aside from the role itself, what I wasn't really getting out of it was some creativity and problem solving that um, I was able to tap into back in my college days and just throughout life. And I knew I was kind of desiring something else. But then I didn't even know UX design existed then. It was not a curriculum in my school. So I ended up getting connected with my sister's really good friend, um, Meredith, and she had actually gone through BeginX. And I talked with her about it after learning more, doing all my research on design. I just decided to go for it just because I saw that I got a lot of ownership over what I was doing and the designs. And and yeah, that was kind of the beginning. And here we are now.
All right, awesome. So, what were some of the biggest challenges for you in the beginning?
Yeah, so starting out, I with my data background and having studied econ and computer science, I felt pretty confident in some of the research methodologies and um, some of the like earlier stage processes in the overall kind of like cookie cutter design process. But then visual design was something I had never done in any sense. So that was definitely a next, like a long-term learning journey for me. And it still is. It's still probably not like my strongest asset, but I think I manage pretty well today.
All right, awesome. And I think now AI can help you quite a bit with that, right?
Exactly.
So
Yes.
at least partially, not completely, of course, but just
Yeah,
makes one more productive. Um,
exactly. Great ideation tool. Highly recommend.
all right. Tell us a little bit more. How did you initially go about building the hard skills? So we'll talk about soft skills next, but just tell us a bit more about the hard skills. And in your opinion, what were the most important ones that employers look for?
Yeah. So, I mean, the boot camp program certainly gave me a good structure for building some of the hard skills, um, as well as just, I think for me, what worked best was just diving into the work itself via a project. Um, that's how I feel even today in my role. Um, I'm going to be able to figure it out as I go, especially with all the great resources that are available online, like NNG or any other resources out there regarding human computer interaction. But um, what was the rest of your question?
Yeah, hard skills, right? And I think did you also let me if I remember correctly, right? You also did our project-based learning guide, right? To kind of pick up some of the basics before the actual cohort, right?
I did. Yes.
So I think that's probably what helped as well, right? So basically, yeah, this question is it's basically, it's not the most popular one. Like most people, they kind of just, okay, I know everything about the hard skills. How do I get a job? But we do want to step back a little bit, right? And just kind of ask how you built up all these different parts, right? Because if you miss some particular phase, then basically you can end up being in the wrong phase, right? Or in the wrong phase of that journey, right? The career transition journey or
100%.
career advancement journey. and then you might just not get as good of results, right? So that's why we kind of like to step back and kind of explore this first product part, right? That I talked about earlier. Um, and then we'll
Yeah.
talk a bit more about the actual career stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I know um I think there's a big difference between what employers are specifically like asking about with hard skills commonly, versus like what's really needed to ship a product, right?
Hmm.
And ship a like create a good design. Um, for me, digging into user research methodologies was, I think, really important, and there's like such a huge plethora of that. Um, I'm trying to think back to my days
Hmm.
of starting out, uh, and really just taking the time with each phase of a UX design process and exploring all the different alternatives for what you could do. Um, and yeah, like critically thinking about if it's when it's applicable versus not, I think is probably a huge part of it. And then also anything that involves like a tool is super helpful. It'll make your life easier when you have to actually use the tool on the job. Um, is huge. So like Figma. Hopefully, no one's using Sketch and Adobe XD too often these days. But I have in my jobs, and then um, and you never know. In interviews, they will have you design on the spot sometimes. It's very rare, but they may ask you to open Figma, and hopefully you're ready to do so. So, so yeah, that was my like initial remembrance of what's happened with hard skills.
Yeah, that's cool. And we can come back to the AI piece later potentially if you're and just ask you if you're using that currently, but after we discuss some additional things. And if you guys have any related questions about hard skills specifically or tools, etc., feel free to pop those into the Q&A tab and we'll address them in a bit. Um, so how about soft skills, Mitchell, and in like UX soft skills? And in your opinion, what are the top soft skills that UX hiring managers in your experience were looking for, and how did you obtain those?
Yeah, definitely. Oh, and actually, I kind of want to circle back to hard skills because I um, I can speak to employers a bit and what my experience thus far with it was. Often I found employers asking about design systems, especially if you're looking to work at a larger company. Um, they're utilizing those, and if you don't have uh, experience or a story that you can tell related to working within a design system, they're just going to be a little less confident in that ability. Um, also, as well, just solid visual design principles, which could be represented through your projects and portfolio, and the occasional on the spot design exercise. And then real it doesn't need to be super in depth typically if you're only going for a UX design role, but just user research, basic user research principles can go a long way in showing that you have experience in that is like a plus one, I feel like. But now soft skills, uh, which I think are definitely the most important and set you apart in an interview. Like those are the things that uh, the interviewers are really interested in. The hard skills are more of the things that you just kind of check the box on. Um, and when it comes to soft skills, demonstrated problem solving through your projects, but then on top of that, how you work with stakeholders. And I hear it from so many other people, and it's also been my experience through the interview processes, is it's really having real examples of how you've worked with product managers, engineering, when you've spoken with them, had difference of opinions, when a project had to change course because the timeline's different, or this is too hard to build, or we actually don't have that data available to us. All of those things. So the more it can be rooted in like real life experiences and not designing in a like you designed it in a silo and then here's the final design, the more the more it's like working at the company and therefore they'll be more interested, I think.
Mm. Yeah, those are great points. That's because sometimes this reminds me of like even in the program, sometimes because there are similar situations that happen, right? Something changes. Maybe the user says, give some feedback that it goes against what the client wants, right? So maybe the scope changes, right? And in the moment, it can feel like really annoying and painful, etc. But then, typically, what I keep hearing from many people is that those experiences create like the best case studies often that
Mhm.
have those real constraints, real project constraints, and also equip you with the skills that you just mentioned, right? So ability to collaborate with and kind of how you handle that and how you handle conflict, how you handle difference of opinion, etc. So yeah, I think that makes so much sense.
100%. Yeah. I've through my jobs, the people who are able to deal with ambiguity and deal with being challenged on the spot in a professional and uh, like smart way, the much better that they do, and they uh, people like to work with you. So
Yeah, yeah, definitely important. So, do you have any thoughts or tips on breaking into UX without professional experience?
yeah, so I do think the biggest part is having some sort of project that you can hold up and talk about. And then the experiences on that project, right? So being able to really speak to the the reason for the project and then the results of that, and then how you worked with people throughout it. Um, I think in the interview process, that already builds like a really solid foundation. And then I think, yeah, it's a kind of you have to be scrappy to get the right experiences that you want. Um, so through BeginX, I was lined up with two different companies, nonprofits to work with, um, which definitely built me really solid case studies. But then as I moved forward with time, was kind of still struggling in the job market, and I decided to do another pro bono project with a company, and it was a bit of a different experience, which I think was helpful for my portfolio. I was the only designer, so didn't have anyone to rely on, but I could say in my portfolio and in my interviews, everything you see is what I did, right? It's not shared work. I did this part over here, and my partner did this part over here. Um, like I did all of it, and I worked directly with the person who was running the startup, and it also made it really clear storytelling, I think. So through all of those experiences, yeah, I was able to land a job after that, which was good.
Mm, yeah, that's great. And we're gonna dive into the details of all the different projects in a second. Um, but yeah, so basically you ended up having three real projects overall, right? So two from the
Yes,
program and one additional one that you decided to do.
I did. Yes.
Okay, okay, got it. All right. So you kind of answered my next question for you is how did you go about building real experience? So you could, so basically it was through the program. Um, Maybe tell us to make sure it's useful for anyone, not just those who join the program, but for anyone in general. All right. So tell us a bit more about that real experience that you gained um, before you were able to gain to land your first role. And
Mhm.
maybe a bit more detail about the projects, about the case studies. I know it has been a little while, um,
Yeah.
but yeah, tell us a bit more.
Yeah, I'll try my best. Yeah, so right near the start of the Begin X program was aligned with the intern group, which there I partnered with three other designers, and we all worked on this client-facing app for basically for recruiting international interns. Um, and it was it was more of like a B2B experience, which I was able to later advertise in my portfolio. Um, and the being my first real project in UX, it was a messy process. Very helpful to have a mentor at the time, I would say, and people to bounce ideas off of. So highly recommend all of that if you can manage it. Um, and then yeah, after completing that, that was a real full end-to-end design process. So going through research, developing an information architecture for the app we were trying to build, syncing up as much as possible with the other teams working on the other sides of the app experience, which I will say, looking back, I think we could have done even more of that. So to make sure it all aligned well together. And then moving through high fidelity, low fidelity wireframes, high fidelity, meeting with the client to review mock-ups and get feedback, um, and then eventually delivering those designs to them to hopefully launch themselves. Um, and then, yeah, after that, worked with a company called Cambio Labs. They were an ed tech learning app for entrepreneurship, specifically for young adults of about like high school age. This was a really fun project, completely different, right? We got to play a ton with visual design because it was geared towards a younger audience and it was supposed to be really engaging um, for them. So we kind of limited the scope of this project such that it wouldn't end up taking like a year to design, but just like through a few months, just like the prior project. And through that, it was pretty end to end, but I think it was a bit more of like a we really led that design process. And so we tried to be strategic about when something, when a step of the traditional design process made sense versus when maybe it wasn't worth conducting user research quite yet because um, like we didn't like have any like specific learnings we were looking for or something like that. Yeah. And then the last one, which happened after I was already in the market for the job search, was with Kime. And they were an app for pet fostering uh, based from animal shelters and trying to make that process just easier and more efficient. And so this was where I was the only designer working with a CEO and their CTO. And these were both people who had not the CEO didn't have a ton of tech and like experience in terms of like building apps, but she had previously worked at Visa, I believe in marketing, and then the chief technology officer had a ton of experience. So that was a nice program that I don't know, how did I get that job? I I think I just applied online at like one of those like volunteermatch.com or something like that. Uh, and ended up to doing an interview or two and got matched up with them to do that pro bono work. And that led me into the next job, my real first UX design job, um, or where at least I didn't have the title of UX designer, but I certainly got to do some UX design work, which was the biggest part.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, any questions about any of those?
Yeah, that was great. I appreciate sounds like you have good memory. So discuss, telling us about all the different phases and details. So that's great. So just to um, do a quick recap. So it sounds like, well, at least I know the first one was definitely very comprehensive, right? So it covered all those UX phases, etc. Then the second one sounds like I know it's more flexible, right? Where you can manage the process more as a team after you go through the first one in the core program.
Hmm.
Um, but that one still covered the key phases of the UX process, right?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It was still very much comprehensive, which I think is important, especially for getting that first role. You want to show that you understand the whole process and you can apply it, and like, and have those skills, right? Have those hard skills of each part of the UX core process. But then once you have that, and especially with like my work with Kime on that pet fostering app, um, in the business itself, things get messy, and you need to be able to pivot when you may not have all the time in the world for it. And so that sort of strategy around project management, I think, goes a long way in interviews, especially after landing your first role.
Okay, awesome. So that's great. And I see we have some questions showing up on Q&A already, which is awesome. And again, just to remind everyone, please don't put the questions in the chat. Please put them in the Q&A section. This just helps keep everything in one place. And you can also upload others' questions. And please do so. Take a look. And if you're interested in someone else's question, then upload it. And that way we know like which ones are the most popular ones and have clear way to prioritize, etc. All right. Let me see, and we'll take Kaushani's question in a second because I think it's directly related to your background, Mitchell. So that is very cool. Um, all right. So you've already kind of described the different case studies. So let me see.
Mm-hmm. I can dig a little more into the CAME case studies because they were interesting. I almost came out of it with two
Mm-hmm.
projects of work, right? So I in starting to work for them, they initially were very focused on that app that I mentioned, where they
Mm-hmm.
wanted to build this new pet fostering app. But upon starting working on that, one, they knew technically it would be a big overhaul, and they already had like a really brief foundation for it. And their marketing officer and CEO discovered that the conversion from their public facing landing page, so just a kind of a traditional marketing website for a product, was having really bad conversion. And so they shifted my focus to redesigning that. And it was built on Webflow because it wasn't too big. It was pretty simple. So I had Webflow experience from building my portfolio on Webflow. So I was able to go in and work on that with them, and update their website myself, basically, um, and also design it. So I got a little bit of work on more so like real product and application. But what my main focus probably was really that public facing website. And I had a clear goal, which was really helpful, of driving conversion. So in my case studies, I was able to talk all about how I successfully drove conversion into the app, which was nice.
Okay. Yeah, that is great as well. And do you remember how you found that one? What's particular platform it was, or if it was through someone you knew, or
It wasn't
if
someone
not,
I
it's
knew.
okay.
Yeah, it
Okay.
was it was like a some volunteer website.
Hmm.
I could probably find it today. I don't think it wasn't Idealist, but I think they post true like nonprofit jobs. But um, yeah, it was just a place where there's a few different websites definitely where you can uh, submit a short little application for pro bono work,
Yeah, yeah, I
and
know
that they should
there's
have some designers.
sorry, sorry. Um, yeah, I know there is also Catch a Fire, right? That and maybe Mika can put it in the chat as well, or some other platforms, because people often ask what are some sites, what are some platforms. So I've heard about Catch a Fire, and you can just obviously Google just volunteer platforms. Just ensure that if you try to do volunteer projects, um, just try to ensure that it's actually going to be a great case study, right? So basically what we covered earlier, right, in terms of those, like what makes an effective case study and effective and useful experience. Because sometimes I've heard about some people doing volunteer work and then getting stuck in that project for like months or even like a year and still only getting through like one or two phases. So sometimes that happens too. So just be careful. Um, yeah, and so basically, I'll try to ensure the project is planned and scoped in advance, like understand what makes an effective UX case study first before planning that project, right? So, and
100%.
yeah, often if you have a choice of just getting paid a little bit and just doing like one phase or like some tiny projects versus volunteering, but having a say and shaping the project, right? All the different phases, all the scope, the timeline, etc., right? Because you can have more leverage, and that can just get you so much, like such a stronger case study overall. So that is very important. So, and in terms of duration, let me also ask you this, and then I want to jump in, take Kaushani's question and maybe a few others. So I love all the questions coming in. Amazing. Sounds like you guys are doing some active listening here. Not multitasking. I mean, no judgment if you're multitasking. I know it's an online event,
Hopefully, I'm
but
not boring you.
but the more focused you are, the more you'll benefit. So in terms of duration, Mitchell, so I know your first core program project was about 10 weeks, right? Then do you remember approximate duration? What was it? Was it about the same for Cambio Labs and the other one?
Yes, Cambio Labs is about the same. I think my team maybe extended it a week or two, just because we wanted to finish it the right way and had the time individually. So maybe it was like about 10 to 12 weeks with Cambio Labs. And then with Came, it was, I think, like November to February. So it was maybe
Mm-hmm.
about 14 to 16 weeks. So a little longer. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and they were willing to have me on as long as I was willing to continue. And I was actively like doing design work for them, so it was going along pretty well. Um, I just happened to get the full-time job and decided I didn't want to balance both anymore.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, you just get hired, and finally, you get to enjoy the actual salary, right? And
Exactly. Exactly. Everyone else there was working free too, though, so no one was getting paid yet.
yeah, I mean, it's nice. It's nice to, of course, help meaningful companies and do pro bono work as well, right? But of course, you you also need the ultimate goal of doing these projects, right? In terms of the UX career transition, is to be able to get a UX role, right? And be more marketable than others. Um, Kaushani asked, coming from a CS and data analyst background, do you think knowing coding has proven useful when collaborating with engineers in the current market? Does picking up HTML, CSS, JavaScript make sense, or should designers from non-tech background focus more on integrating AI in the workflow, or both? Asking because I came across some job descriptions requiring front-end knowledge. So,
That
what are
is
your thoughts
such
on
a good question.
that?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. So, you're gonna find a mix. And so I've applied for roles that are a UX designer role, product designer role. And then in the first interview, they're asking, how much coding do you really know? Because we kind of want you to implement some of this, or we want you to code prototypes for us. And I had interviewed with NVIDIA actually back last year before I landed my Capital One job, and they were interested in this. Um, and so that that definitely wasn't my primary skill set. And so those sorts of roles are going to be someone who has prior front end development experience, I would say, and that's harder to do if you're not coming from a really technical background. And so I wasn't the right fit for that role, right? But there's so many other roles that the way having prior coding knowledge does help is that I'm able to meet with the engineering team and put my like specs of my designs almost in their language, not like semantically, right? So not directly in code with every single perfect uh like comma or semicolon and, and quote, but um I'm able to like kind of write it back to them in code. And I found this is especially helpful for very junior developers if you're working with people who are newer to it. They can easier translate what your design is into code if you're able to explain like what the logic is for something using if and or statements, right? Um, but given that, I think AI is making developers more powerful, right? And how to implement code, so or implement designs. So I think with time, there's probably less needed knowledge of development for designers given the rise of AI, but there is definitely a huge emphasis on comfort with utilizing like LLMs and specific tools around AI in design and development. Um, at Capital One, where there's constantly like a new AI tool that they're wanting us to try, and then they're looking to implement. Right now, we only have access to Google Gemini, which has been helpful, and I'm able to ideate right on different concepts and bring them into like a fake interface that I can interact with. But even then, we're exploring Figma Make, and that's a AI tool that can basically do the designing and the coding for you, and then you can plop it right into your design file. Um, so having some sort of knowledge base in how to utilize an I think, is likely to come up in interviews now. I'd never had them come up in interviews previously. No one asked me about my experience using AI, but um, I think with time they will start.
Yeah, yeah. I think that definitely. It's just it has been progressing quickly, even though right now, more recently, it seems like we're more like there's not as much tech growth and like AI tech growth, but there is much more focus on the actual adoption to what has already grown, basically, right? So that's what it.
100%.
So it's at least that was my um, kind of observation and based on a lot of research with GPT and others.
Yeah, and I think it's very different on the roles you're going for too. A startup is gonna be more interested in utilizing AI and having their employees utilize it um, because they're wanting you to work quickly compared to maybe a really large scale organization that has more bureaucracy. Um, there's also typically fewer legal barriers for like startups than at Capital One. We're very worried about getting sued or having something break. And so we have lots of legal reviews and content reviews to make sure what we ship is protected versus startups are a bit more break things fast. So depending on what role you're going for at what company, I think you could expect different sorts of questions on
Mm,
that in interviews.
okay, okay. Yeah, that's great. So, Kaushani, you let us know if we answered your question. I think that was quite, we discussed this quite a bit, so hopefully that was helpful. Um, So I see a lot of other questions coming in. Amazing. We'll be taking more and more in a second. And so I see Valerie's question about interviews. So Valerie will come back to that in a second once we kind of get a little bit closer to the actual interview um, phase, right? To try to keep it more logical um, in terms of progression through your UX career transition or career advancement journey. Um, Let me see what else I wanted to ask you, Mitchell. So in terms of internships, I know you did not do internships in UX, right? But just briefly, any thoughts on doing that? Because I know it can be one way to potentially build some experience and case studies. Any quick thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think they're great. I felt at the time because I was out of school, often the internships I was interested in were specifically targeted for people in grad school or in undergrad programs in the US. So there were a few I had applied for, I think, or probably a few that I interviewed for that I just didn't get. Um, but yeah, I think in terms of, I mean, hopefully you're getting paid in the internship, and then you're that's even more uh, credible, right? For in terms of what your next employer will look for. So I think an internship's like a great next step whenever you're looking for your first role.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It seems like yeah, internships are great. Just make sure that you can find a good one, right? So um,
Yeah.
if you try to, because there are lots of internships that are, it's basically like you said, right? It's often they're focused on college students, right? So if you're out of college, sometimes it can be a little bit tougher, but sometimes you can still find one. I would say something to watch out for. Like if you, the great ones are typically much more competitive, right? So they're almost similar to your first job, basically. Um, and if you find some other one, make sure that it's again, it's useful for your portfolio, right? It can be useful to show an experience on your resume, but I've spoken with like lots and lots of candidates and they do an internship for like a year sometimes, and they just do this tiny project, that tiny project, this tiny feature, etc., and ultimately don't have any case studies, right? In some cases, or they just do wireframing, or they just do one
Mhm.
phase. So basically, because they are not I mean, some internships are amazingly designed to actually give you amazing experience and amazing portfolio, but that's not their primary goal. Their primary goal is to get help, right, and to get some work done, right? So just be careful with that to ensure that the actual you are getting a decent case study, and that can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, plus one to all of that. Yeah, especially because it's not intended to be a full-time, long-term engagement. Um, you if you're entering into something like that, you want it to be worthwhile for yourself and for your next step because you know there's going to be a next step. So start planning for it before you even start, is how I try to approach things.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because I mean, I've spoken to so many people because we're on these strategy session or first UX role hireability sessions. And by the way, if you're interested, you're welcome to sign up for one. You should see the link later in the chat. Um, we'll basically do like an audit for you. But I speak with so many people, and often we run into stories where basically someone volunteers or does an internship, etc., without really strategizing in the beginning, like or maybe not being able to strategize or shape the project, right? And ultimately not really getting a great case study or not really getting that useful of an experience, right? So that's just something to keep in mind. I know it's not always in your control, right? It's not always possible, but ideally try to think about that in advance, right? So you don't waste 2 years and then still have a weak portfolio, basically. So that's just something to watch out for. Um, all right. So let me take another question here. And Alexandra, I know you, I wonder if you could maybe clarify the question a little bit because your question is what's the outlook on low fidelity in the world of AI? Maybe do you want to just add a little bit to that, right? I mean, we can try to take it as is, but it sounds like it could benefit, like if you could define it, like what you're trying to understand a little bit better. Low fidelity, like wireframing, prototyping, low fidelity, something else, or so I'll just give you a few moments. If you can add something. Okay, I see you already put something. Good. Paying attention. Wireframing. So you want to just talk briefly,
Mhm.
Mitchell, outlook on low fidelity wireframing in the world of AI?
Yeah, definitely. It is interesting. So through my work experiences, I've gone in and out of utilizing low fidelity wireframes. You always end up at something high fidelity, right? But low fidelity is really good for something that you're not sure where it's going to lead to visually, and you really want to explore multiple concepts and ideate. So sometimes you really need to utilize low fidelity and wire it up, right? Other times you may have a strong vision for the visuals, or you may be very limited with the visuals, and you just need to think about like what sort of data and content you need to put up on the website. And therefore, you may not need to put it in a low fidelity wireframe. You could just use like stickies and and write out the data that you're going to include on the page, right? So I think it depends on what you're working on and what that kind of like breadth is of your options. Um, I can give a quick example of I'm currently working on a dashboard widget, and it's the very first version of this for the product that I work on. So I explored a ton of concepts, and it was a bit easier to start with low fidelity in that it takes less time, can confirm like some visual hierarchies of that nature, and show it off to product managers, other designers, and get their feedback on it. Um, so I still think it's worthwhile and it does happen. But yes, in the age of AI, you could write it out in words potentially and get something that you're interested in a high fidelity sort of way. Um, I think you just have to you have to choose it for the project if that makes sense. Um, but one last thing I'll say is if you work in a company that has a really strong design system, and you really have to stick to the design system quite often, um, you can skip to high fidelity very quickly often. If you're just making the same version of a widget with new content and a different illustration, you just skip straight to it, right? You don't need to worry about wiring it up.
Mm. Yeah, those are great points. Yeah, thank you, Mitchell. So, Alexander, hopefully that gives you some insights. Let us know in the chat or in Q&A. All right. And I see Akshata's note, okay, that you're using chat for Q&A because you're taking this, watching this from mobile. Um, so let me see. I think you asked about, yeah, design handoff to developers. Okay. My question, if you can find time to answer, can you tell how to showcase the design handoff to developers in case studies? And I think we have that. Alexander kind of doubled that in the, the like wrote that as well in the Q&A tab. So,
Yeah, I can talk about that. I think when it comes to handoff, it's definitely important to talk about it in the interview. But then in case studies, in a presentation deck, portfolio, I think it's helpful to have a annotated mock-up of your final design and show examples of where you pointed out specific technical requirements for the developer. So showing that you like kind of went that extra mile and didn't just give them the Figma, but also called out things that were unique about the design that they need to pay attention to. I think that's a good like visual. Then on top of that, I would just tell the story of it, right? So like in this part of my process to kind of close it out before Q&A. So quality assurance and working with the developer to make sure it was implemented well. Before that, I met with the dev team, explained all the designs to them, made sure they understood it, answered all their questions, um, and handed off those design files to them with the appropriate documentation and sort of like redlining of uh, those different important requirements. Um, yeah, and I think that's pretty much it. That'll mostly, as long as you're making it clear that it's like a part of your process, it's worked well for me through thus far.
Mm. Okay, okay. Awesome. Thank you, Mitchell. I see a great question here from Kamal. So, Kamal, we'll come back to that as well because it's actually about your Capital One role and kind of what led to that, et cetera. So, we'll come back to this like after we discuss the case studies and experience and kind of what led up to the first role in a bit more detail. And great question, and already has two upvotes as well. Um, awesome. All right. Mitchell, so in your opinion, what do you think were the top three things that made your UX portfolio effective?
I think storytelling and keeping things so with that storytelling is trying to make things really scannable and readable and visually engaging. Uh, so you really don't want like more than like two sentences smushed together. Like really trying to just give the highlights, but give enough detail so that they understand what you did. And I think one of the biggest things for me was up front, letting them know, okay, what was the problem identified? What was the opportunity? What was your like hypothesis for how to solve it? And then what was that result? Um, Having that upfront and at the end of the case study very clearly laid out, because we like product manager or portfolio hiring managers often don't have a ton of time to look over things, especially with the job market that there's so many applicants. They're just constantly like weeding through, and they're often doing it like at night after they're done with work during that day or something. So they're sometimes hiring can be like a secondary task for hiring managers um, after their full-time role. So keeping that in mind and trying to streamline everything as much as possible, um, but still telling like an authentic story and showing that experience.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then make it fun and personal if you can. That's like always great. I never felt like I was that good at that, but I would look at some people's portfolios and be like, oh, they're so fun. Like they look like they'd be fun to work with.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really good. I'm typing some notes here as well. So, all right, so that's good. Okay, and I think Bahare, and by the way, if I mispronounce anyone's name, sorry about that. Obviously not intentional. You can correct me in the chat if you'd like. Um, So coming back to case studies and searching for projects that could become case studies. And we can, so basically the specific question is, what keywords or search terms do you recommend I use to find legitimate UX volunteer projects that can turn into real portfolio worthy case studies? And let me just, Bahare, so rephrase that maybe a little bit because we can talk about search terms, but it's less about search terms. It's like, how do you define what makes a great case study first, right? And then you can use any search terms, right, to just find projects, right? And then you just evaluate the potential project and see if it could become that, right? So, Mitchell, what would you like to um, add anything? in terms of keywords, the search terms, or just how to find those in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll try my best. I think for me, when I was looking specifically for that volunteer opportunity, um, I tried to look for one when I landed on something. I evaluated like the kind of credibility of it, right? So like how much detail was provided, um, if there was something like about the poster, like looking to see, okay, have they posted anything about any other opportunities? Um, do they have anything existing, right? I think it's it may be hard to do like a 0 to 1 sort of app build or website build for someone that feels like a really big project. So for me, I think I was looking for something that was already going a little bit and I could join and contribute and then depart, right? um, so if that feels like that would make sense for what you need on your portfolio and your like what kind of drives you, I think that is something good to look for. And yeah, I think what went a long way for me was sort of the experience that the people I worked with had. Um, they had very like professional experiences of the past, and I was able to kind of lean on that, right? And um, they operated in a way that wouldn't be that different than how you would operate like at a actual job, um, which I appreciated. And if you can learn about that in advance somehow when you're exploring the opportunities, whether they've posted their LinkedIn, uh, I think that can be beneficial. But yeah, in terms of specific things to search for, I just searched for UX designer role, product designer. Yeah, I don't really know beyond that.
Yeah,
I
I
think
would
pro
also, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I'd say I think product design is like the more common term today, and then UX after that. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah, it's I would also say, Bahare, you can also search, so it's less about keywords, right? I'd also search for accelerators, startup accelerators and incubators. And sometimes
yes,
you can find companies through that. So sometimes it's not something that's advertised, right? There's, oh, come and volunteer for us. Sometimes there are just companies. Ideally, try to find like we discussed before, digital products, right? So website for a local small business, it's still good. It's still like better than doing hypothetical stuff. But ideally, you want to find like a digital product, right? Let's say some kind of startup or something. Even though failure rates are much higher for startups, right? That's totally fine in for you because even if something happens to them later, you'll still have the experience. You'll still, again, it's not ideal, of course, but it gets you 80% of the way there, right? And it basically still gets you the experience, the case studies, etc. It doesn't cancel out your experience if a startup fails later. Um, and you can search for incubators, accelerators, where you live or just online in general, right? And just offer your services. It's just important to pitch to them in a way that persuades them because sometimes that can be hard as well. Even if you offer to, do some pro bono work, you still need to be able to sell them on the value of that, right? Because they are taking a risk, right? Because they may not be paying anything, but they will need to invest time. They may, so that's why it's like can be tricky. So you still need to persuade them. Um, and
yeah,
just,
and I definitely
yeah.
agree with looking for an app if you can work on that because you're better set up to speak in interviews about how you not only were addressing like user needs and usability, but like, okay, how does this help the business? How does this make money? Um, Goes a huge way. And to be honest, I didn't have much experience in saying that until Capital One. And it feels good that like I'm designing for a company and I'm like helping the bottom line. whereas a lot of other stuff I've done uh, wasn't necessarily focused on that. So
Yeah, yeah. All right, so let's do this quickly. Nisha, I want to ask you another quick question about your portfolio, basically your biggest mistakes that you might be able to identify and share with us if you'd like. And then after that, I want to take Zach's question because it seems like a nice big description of like a whole case, like not a portfolio case study, but Zach as a case study, right? And kind of his situation. I want to provide
yeah,
some insight potentially.
love that. Yeah, biggest mistakes. Ooh, it's hard. I mean, for my portfolio, I was constantly iterating on it while applying for jobs. Sure, I would take a week off if I had an interview here and there, but I almost always had something I wanted to improve or a new case study I was trying to put on there and finish up. So I definitely encourage while you want to get everything ready and then apply to jobs, like don't stop yourself from applying to a job that you're interested in. Um, because at the worst, you'll just get a good interview experience if you get the job, and you may just not get the job. That's okay. But back to the portfolio, yeah, biggest mistakes. It's probably just too long, maybe on some of the case studies, especially at the beginning, I would say. Um, I think I went back to my first case study and tried to make it more concise. I also went back and tried to improve some of the like visual hierarchy and um, really highlighting some of those like really important points that I wanted to drive home, um, like the problem statement, like the actual solution, and then bringing up the mock-ups that like right away because that will catch the attention, let them know that you have solid visual design skills, and give them an idea of what you were designing. Um, yeah, that's all I can think of right now. But
Hmm. Okay, okay, that's great. So, all right, so back to Zachary's question. So Zachary is saying, my strongest case studies were conducted at General Assembly. That was 6 years ago, and I want to find that clarity of idea that projects from my real UX work experience never captured. So my question is, how do I start again? Right now, I'm running solo as a UX designer, and even with help from a researcher, I would have nowhere near the same amount of resources, energy, environment, tool familiarity as I did then. Coming up with inspiration on my own has never been strength either. I feel I was told before the answer is no once before, but does the age of the case study really matter? So quite a bit of information, Zachary, but I see the question at the end. Um, so does the age of the case study really not matter? So that's the core question. Um, Sounds like, and Zach, you just let us know in the chat, right? If we captured if that's the core question. If you have any specific question, after then we can talk about this just in general as well.
yeah, so I think you don't want whatever work you did to feel outdated, right? Like no one wants to see a case study from the 90s, really, especially if you're trying to show off like visual design. But ultimately, what an employer is looking for is like good problem solving skills. And hopefully, you were doing that in that case study 6 years ago. And so I think it can still be very applicable. If and then of course, like if you have some experience and you're not going for like a true entry level role, you may not want to include like quite every little detail about the UX design process and focus more on like the key results from it. But if you are going for a more entry level role, I think you can really just like give them the whole breadth of the project for the most part and show that you had that experience, even if it was a long time ago. One thing I think all employers will be asking though is like, okay, what did you do between? Why no case study since then, sort of thing. So just having an answer for that will be good. But Because
Yeah.
in general, employers are just biased towards recent work experience, but it doesn't mean what you did before like wasn't valuable. It was just a little while ago. So.
Yeah, yeah, and also to add to that, Zachary, so I'm also so yeah, I think I agree completely with what Mitchell said, and just to add to that was just like yeah, you want the case study to be overly old, and what can help is getting something more recent, right? Then you just can show more continuity, right? So basically. Um, if you only have an older case study, right, I think it looks much worse than if you have the older case study and then you have a newer one, then you kind of just show more continuity in general, if you know what I mean, right?
Mm, yes.
And the other part is you mentioned I'm a little bit confused, and I'm not sure, Zachary, if you're still on because I think he did mention that he had to like jump off or something earlier. But yeah, we'll try to do our best. Because he was asking about the recording. So when you watch the recording, uh, well, essentially, I'm a little bit confused why you mentioned that strongest case studies were from GA because if you did real work after that, right? So, and basically, in some cases, maybe you didn't get good case studies from that, right? That's possible, right? But in general, right, almost any real project is typically more effective in your portfolio and on as a case study than hypothetical. Because I know GA does, depending on what program you do, right, they typically do hypothetical projects. The immersive, the full-time one, has real project at the end. Typically, it's relatively short based on what I've heard. Um, so. But yeah, to add to that, you basically just want to have, ideally, you want to have 3 to 5 sizable case studies. Three is usually like the magic starting number, and two of them with good comprehensive real client projects, right? If you don't have anything recent, I would recommend doing something more recent that is strong and comprehensive, and just follow the tips that we discussed. Reach out to accelerators, incubators, or you can apply to our program if you'd like, right? As well, right? And we can help you get there as well much faster, right? Because the challenge is sometimes when you are on your own, you can do all this stuff, right? Usually, if you're motivated, if you're like committed, motivated, you can do it. The problem is it just typically takes much longer, right? So when you have a system that you can kind of plug into, it just can happen much faster. Um, so hopefully that answers your question. And Zach, I'm not sure if you're still on still on the call or not, but yeah, if you watch the recording, hopefully this will be useful. All right. So Mitchell, what I also wanted to ask you is, I know we actually just touched on this. So in your opinion, what types of projects are typically most effective in one's portfolio?
Mm, I would say, well, what you just said, definitely something from a real work experience. Um, I think if you can show how the project drove business value, that's really important. Um, so sure, maybe it like improved the user's experience and made things more usable. But what was the next step? Like, and if you somehow were able to measure that, that's like really great. And you can include that on your resume too about like, okay, this drove this much revenue or this drove um, this much more adoption of the product. Um, and then other than that, I think more and more, it's really hard when you're starting out to know where you'll end up in a specific field. But if you have a really strong passion for a particular area, and that's what you want to work in long term, like you can always focus on trying to get a job and get experience in that sort of industry. Um, so if you really enjoy designing for internal employees or something, like there's that whole enterprise design, which while it's all applicable and the design process and skills are all applicable across the board, um, having some of that like user knowledge goes a long way when speaking about it in interviews, especially with like after your first job, I would say.
Mm.
Um, so that's probably it right now that I can think of.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And why do you think? Because I know you mentioned we talked about real projects. You mentioned real projects. Um, Maybe let's dig in a little bit more in terms of the difference, right? Why do you think it was important for you to have real client case studies in your portfolio and not just hypothetical? And what do you think is the difference? And how can you tell hypothetical projects apart from real ones?
Yeah. I mean, it's having those experiences of working with people. So that stakeholder management, I think, is the biggest thing. Um, and designing with constraints, right? Like we had talked about previously. Everything like we could we could design and build something that was so incredible and perfect, but if we don't if we have no real idea like that it can actually get built and would actually be used by people and uh, have some sort of like success, then what was the point of doing it in the first place, you know? So I think while a hypothetical shows off hard skills, it just like doesn't really show off any soft skills. And that, in my experience, is what employers are like caring most of is the soft skills. Um, so definitely focus on those in interviews where you have the opportunity on those real work experiences. But you know, occasionally uh, that project at the very bottom of your list may catch someone's eye. So it's definitely worth having all your work on there that you've done. Uh, it's not, it's certainly not worthless. It shows those great hard skills and great like ideation, which is a huge skill. Um, but it's not involving a ton of problem solving, if that makes sense, to overcome like challenging situations.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that's great. That's all right. So hopefully that um, yeah, I think that was a great answer in terms of because I'm trying to just help everyone understand the difference, right? In terms of because some people is like, oh, I did a few projects. They're all comprehensive. They're even team-based, but they're hypothetical. So it's a big difference. It's also a difference in terms of like how it looks on your resume, right? Is it listed in your professional experience section, or is it listed somewhere else as like extracurricular or whatever projects or activities or something like that? All right, so that's or your LinkedIn, right? So that's a big difference as well because you want to have stuff, not stuff, but work experience in your um, professional experience section of your LinkedIn or your resume. Um, all right.
Exactly. And I think it's interesting. I think it can help you if you don't emphasize the fact that your work was pro bono or volunteer based previously. If someone asks you, of course, you should tell them that it was volunteer based, but you don't have to advertise that on your resume or on your LinkedIn. You can just say, I did some work for this company and made these designs and it had these results. And then you can talk about it in a way that like you were a part of the team. Like it's not that I think there's some bias in the like hiring managers that are viewing a full-time job differently than volunteer work. So try not to sell yourself short on that.
Hmm. Yeah, that's great. All right, so we're almost got to interviewing. Close. We're getting closer. I know we're running a little bit short on time. But I do want to ask you a few more questions and make sure we cover as many questions from Q&A as possible as well. So what I also wanted to ask, Mitchell, is there are many search methodologies, right? Or we call them channels sometimes, right? So which ones are your favorite and why? For example, applying on company sites or job
Mhm.
boards, recruiters, networking, information interviews, friends, social networks, etc. And also, let us know like which search methodology actually got you most interviews, including your first role, previous roles, current role.
Yes. Wait, what was the second part of that question? I'm sorry. I was already thinking of my answer.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, basically search methodologies. Which
Uh-huh.
ones got you the most interviews? Which ones were the most effective for you?
Totally.
And they're probably your favorite ones as well, I would assume, but could be not the case.
Yeah, so I LinkedIn is my go-to. But what I think was actually most successful for me was just searching on Google Jobs. My first two roles out after in UX really. So at Society for Neuroscience and Metric 5, I discovered just through searching on Google for UX product designer roles. And there were roles in my area, um, which I think helped because they seemed to be like kind of partially in person at least. So that limits the population of applicants. It also wasn't posted on LinkedIn yet, which limited the population of applicants. So um, trying to not just focus on one avenue, but expand to other areas, right? When you can look at Indeed and Google Jobs, or if you know of some companies in the area, um, you can always look on the website to see if they have anything. But I really think that's why I got like my second role was because I kind of got myself in the door before a bunch of other applicants got in there and, and took the
Mm,
job from me, maybe. Uh, it's hard to know. The people I worked with wouldn't say that, but it felt like that at the time, you know. Um, so yeah, that's what I would say. Definitely like Google Jobs and LinkedIn.
hmm. Okay, okay. And when you also when you search on Google, right? Let's say you search for a particular role, did it just take you to company websites or where you just applied, or tell me a bit more.
Yeah, it was a mix. Because Google Jobs is basically like I think it's usually just scanning the web for available jobs. It'll sometimes send you to their company website. It'll sometimes send you to Indeed. It'll sometimes send you to a job that doesn't exist anymore. So there's some frustration with Google Jobs, whereas LinkedIn's a bit more reliable. But I always encourage you may apply through that direct link, but also go to their website and see if you should apply there as well. Um, because occasionally, like a link may not work, but it's still on their website, sort of thing. So highly
Hmm.
recommend their actual website.
Okay, so that's great. And in your case, right? So did you also do a lot of networking? Like, did you reach out to people and do a lot of information interviews? Because usually that's what most people say, kind of what got them hired, like basically networking, networking, networking. But it sounds
Yeah,
like it was not the case or no?
it wasn't for me. And I know I still believe it goes like a huge way. Um, but yeah, my first two roles I just got through cold applying. Um, I I think I'm just not like the type of person who loves networking, so I struggle with it. Um, but my current role I got through a referral, and that went a really long way because she works on the same team as me, so we work together. So it referrals and networking can help you more at some companies than others, but I do think it goes a long way in just like learning when a job opens up, right? Because I knew Sarah, um, she reached out to me when the role on her team opened. So I was at the front of the door, ready to
Hmm.
get interviewed. Um, I think they maybe had one or two other people interviewing around the same time as me, but it could have been a different story if they had decided to hire someone else before I had applied, right? So a lot of it is like getting your first foot in the door first at some companies, and having someone that you know at that company like could help with that. So
Hmm. Yeah, that's cool. That's good to know. I don't think I even knew that Sarah kind of referred you there. Um, so
Mhm.
our BeginX alumni network is working.
I know it's huge. It was definitely influential,
Yeah, I love
especially
that.
for getting the interview. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Love that. Yeah, Sarah's great too. Um, All right, and I know you already answered Valerie's typed in the answer to Valerie's question
Yes.
about whiteboards. So I just wanted to kind of cover it briefly for everyone because I'm sure like others might have same questions. So Valerie was asking during your interviews, did you do whiteboard challenges or take-home projects? And so Mitchell did say so. I did both, and whiteboard challenges are typically more common because it shows more real-time collaboration and problem-solving skills. So just wanted to make sure we covered that. And then in a second, we'll come back to Kamal's wonderful question. And then Wesley also asked a question here. And I see, Kaushani, if you could put your question in Q&A, please, if you can. We'll then come back to that as well. I think it's a great question about volunteer work. If not, just let us know, no worries. Um, all right. Okay, so I know we covered quite a bit. So let's just jump into Kamal's question because it
Mhm.
kind of encompasses our whole topic almost, right? So Kamal was asking, what was your successful job strategy that led you to your current role with Capital One? And I know you already kind of answered that partially just now. That led to your current role with Capital One in this tough market, how long it took, and what was the interview process like? Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. So when it comes to getting into Capital One, again, because Sarah had reached out to me, I didn't have a huge strategy involved in like, okay, I'm gonna get that job at Capital One. But I did already had been interviewing a bit and had updated my resume, updated my LinkedIn, updated my portfolio at least partially. And then uh, Sarah had reached out to me and was like, "Oh my gosh, I have to hurry. I have to finish my portfolio before I apply." And so I like really hit the ground running for a week or two, knocked out what I had to, and submitted my application through the referral. And previously, I had a couple interviews, so I had some practice. But to be honest, I would have liked even more. So highly recommend if you're looking for a job, doing mock interviews, trying to get as much interview practice as possible. Um, I get very nervous for interviews, so I get much less nervous with lots of practice. Um, and then the interview process was uh, somewhat involved, but not as bad as some really big tech companies. It was an initial recruiter screening, basically like how uh, what's your background, what's your experience, tell me your story, and then that was about it. And confirm like you're eligible for the role. Then a 30-minute phone call with the hiring manager, who was Sarah's manager at the time, so the person who referred me, and then a hour-long conversation, and that was all behavioral. Sorry to go back. The 30-minute phone call was all behavioral with the hiring manager, an hour portfolio presentation with someone else that like was a designer, somewhat high level, like another manager. And then after that was a like 3.5 hour, uh, three interviews total. So about like an hour, hour and a half each. And uh, usually they try to get it all done in one day, but I had to separate it into 2 days. Um, I'm sorry, it wasn't 3 hours. It was a 45-minute interview and two 30-minute interviews. So not that
Yeah.
bad. But yeah, I was like 3 hours is long. But it was basically two behavioral interviews focusing on slightly different things. Um, and then a another portfolio presentation, but with three people instead of just one. So pretty
Hmm.
involved, but not. It wasn't like as bad as I've heard some stories.
Yeah. All right. So that's good. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Mitchell. And Kamal, hopefully that clarifies your question. Um, all right. So Kaushani's question. So does not mentioning that work was volunteer slash pro bono ever cause issues in background checks?
This is a good question because it definitely made me a little nervous when I was doing this. So, no, it doesn't. So, what you have like on your LinkedIn or your like resume is being viewed by like the hiring manager, right? But then background checks is something that like just gets sent off into the ether typically and then gets returned to them as like yes they had a W-2 at this place sort of thing, right? Like they got paid. So on a background check they're only looking at what you um where you were paid. So that's what you report. And that result of success or warning gets sent back to HR, and isn't really a concern for the people you're working with. But at the same time, like you definitely don't want, like a hiring manager has asked me before, like, oh, was this volunteer work? And I'm like, yes, it was. You don't want to like give them an impression that it wasn't volunteer work, because yeah, then you'd be there's like room for just mistrust. If they find out it wasn't, then in theory you could have been lying in an interview. But in this case, you're not actively lying to them. They just like didn't ask you a question about the work you did. Um, so yeah, it's fine to do.
Yeah, it's basically and it was also thank you, Mitchell. And to add to that, it's basically work is work, right? So and often it is crucial in most cases to get some type of work experience to land your first role, and especially in the current market, right? And often if you only look for traditional jobs and like full-time roles, right, you might not ever overcome that catch-22 problem, right? So you have to
Mhm.
find ways to build your work experience in other ways by volunteering or internships or doing our career accelerator or doing something else, right? So basically doing that in different ways, right? And work is work, right? And you don't have to lie to anyone or et cetera, right? You just basically position it as a pro bono consulting or just work experience that you had. And then if you are asked, right, then you of course you don't like conceal it or something, right? Then you can just if they ask you directly, like, was this paid, how much, etc., right? Then you can, but usually once you get to that stage, they're already interested in you, right? And if you're a great candidate, if you already have that experience, right, there is much more likelihood that you will get hired versus if you did not have that, right? So and we occasionally, even our candidates sometimes, right? So sometimes we have alumni reaching out. Some if employer does a background check or some type of not necessarily a background check, but like verification that the person actually did this work, right? We actually help them with that or ask our clients to help with that and just to confirm as well. So it can come up, right? But it's not something that you cannot solve, right? So it's quite solvable overall. Um, I also want to ask everyone to, if you have a question, maybe you were expecting to learn something today that you haven't learned yet, right? I know our events, we try to make them as like really comprehensive, um, and ask lots of questions and go in depth and because that's personally just what I like to do and like I feel like people can benefit from like not just superficial discussion but like detailed questions. But if you haven't learned something that you were hoping to learn, put that question in the chat now or in Q&A and let us know. Right. So any burning question that you really haven't, and Wesley, I'm getting to your question as well. If you still have a question that you really want to get an answer to, right now is the time. I don't want to hear it after the event. Oh, like I wanted to know this and I didn't. So now is your chance to address that. Um, and I want to, because I know we're a little short on time, so we'll take Wesley's question, then have last question for you as well. Then we'll do this quick program announcement and be wrapping up. Okay, because I know it's been quite some time. Um, so, where's this question? In interviews or portfolio reviews, do employers value design work or client-focused work in related fields? As an example, I worked as an architect for years, and I wonder if showing my architecture work in my portfolio and highlighting how addressing client needs, coordinating design teams, and problem solving were a part of the process would help alongside my UX case studies.
Yeah, so I definitely think it's worth highlighting somewhere in the portfolio. Um, when it comes to that. I think you could do it in a couple ways. Many people who have passion projects that involve some sort of artistic side of themselves or design will like have a separate tab for that sort of work or passion. Um, and it maybe is like a secondary focus of the portfolio website. But what you could also do if it seems like you have like real projects that would apply pretty decently. You could put it like at the end of like case studies basically, and just really clearly label that what's UX or UI or product design versus what is architecture work. Because you never know, you may come across a hiring manager who's like, I used to be an architect, and y'all can bond over that. You could talk about it. So, yeah. And then when it comes to interviews, if it's for a specific like UX role or product design role that doesn't involve architecture, I probably wouldn't use it as like a primary case study because it doesn't directly apply to the role. Um, but if you have like a behavioral question, then you can answer that with this 100% use it. Like behaviorally, like working with people is somewhat universal. So, like, how do you overcome a client's need or like challenging you on something? Like, if that applies, totally use it.
Yeah, Mitchell, thank you. That's a great answer. And to add to that a little bit, Wesley, so yeah, it's basically architecture is a great background for UX, right? We've helped lots of architects. Actually, I remember like someone comes to mind, still works for like many years, worked at Meta. Not right away, but it wasn't their first job, but had architecture, many architect, great background. Um, y- and employers love it because it's basically one of those tangential related close areas, right? So it's the transition is, I'm not going to say it's easy. It's never easy, especially in the current market. But it's a little bit easier than from less related areas, right? So it's those design related area, one of those design related areas where it's a little faster, a little easier, right? But that said, you still want to ensure that you have strong UX specific case studies and portfolio, et cetera. And then once you put all of that together, UX case studies plus your background and soft skills, et cetera, then you'll really shine, right? And not just like before the interviews, right? Before the interviews, your portfolio will shine, right? From with all the UX case studies and like how you intro. Just make sure you're not confusing them, like not try to position architect, like Mitchell just said, not trying to position architecture work as UX, right? Because if I've seen people mix everything up and then it just creates confusion. And it's like one portfolio, and here's my UX case studies, here's my graphic design, here's my architecture. It just becomes a total mess. And so it will not serve you well, right? So just make sure it's clearly separated in different sections or something like that. All right, and but overall, it's a great background and it'll help you a ton, and especially in interviews where you can talk about all the experiences, the soft skills, etc. So that's I see you have thank you. Yeah, thank you, Wesley. Thank you for the additional comments. I see you have another quick question. So let's take that, and then I have last question for you, Mitchell, and then we'll be wrapping up. Um, So another quick question. In interviews, do you bring a physical copy of your portfolio or projects? Do you show your work on a, or do you show your work on a tablet? How do you present your work?
Yeah, so I've never had an in-person interview, so I've never had to bring anything physical. Um, So it's not very common these days, but they do still have some physical interviews. I think startups sometimes like to do it because it's a small team and they like to get to know the people in that personal setting. And then also, I think like some big tech companies are going back to that with their long, like full day of interviews and happy hour and stuff like that. Um, but in general, I think you just need your laptop and they'll usually let you plug it in to a screen if you're presenting a portfolio or something. Um, I think typically portfolio presentations are done remotely because it's just so much easier to share your screen um, in UX and product design. And then if you're in person, it's behavioral and it is something like a whiteboarding session.
Awesome. Thank you, Mitchell. This is great. All right. So, final top three pieces of advice for people either transition into UX or trying to advance their career and get back into UX or get to a better UX role, etc. And kind of any final top three pieces of advice.
Yeah, I think constantly look for ways to improve a portfolio, resume, and most importantly, how you answer interview questions. Um, for me, I learned every interview a new question I needed to have an answer to because I completely stumbled in the interview or uh, learned a new experience I needed to like dig out of my history, right? And be able to talk about coherently. So always keep like a running list of behavioral interview questions and answers and just experiences that you can relate to different things. Um, and then on top of that, I think it's just about yeah, being scrappy and looking if you're into networking and you can don't mind pushing yourself into that sphere, definitely do it. Um, I definitely reached out to people on LinkedIn that said they were hiring, and occasionally I'd get a message back. And don't be don't be too discouraged if you, like me, reached a bunch of final interviews and didn't get the job. You'll have your like by the time you get to that final interview, you're like, okay, I'm almost there. Like I'm gonna get the job. They like me so much, I can feel it. And then it just like doesn't happen for any reason. So uh try to try to stick it out. It'll happen. The experience comes with time. Uh and for me, it's all about iteratively improving every job. So if a job isn't perfect, but will get you better experience than none, I say take it, in my opinion. And then start looking for the next one. That will be even better, right? I'm excited now. I'm in a position at Capital One where I feel like I can gain some really good experience. But at my last two roles, that's why I was only there for a year and a half, was because I knew I wanted to work on a larger UX team. I wanted uh, bigger projects that had more business impact. And um, so I tried to find that and eventually did. So, uh, yeah, encourage you to don't settle, but don't pass on a good opportunity too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mitchell. And sometimes, right, those earlier roles enabled you to, allowed you to land the current role. All right. So that was like a path.
Absolutely.
That's what we also say to many people. Like some people, they just have their dream roles and they're really like set on them. And your first role does not have to be the dream role, right? It can just be a stepping stone, right? So it's
Yeah. My first role was not a UX focused role, really. My manager's wife was a UX design manager at a different company. So he knew a decent amount about UX and was like a big advocate for it. And my role was like therefore partial UX design for a couple public facing websites for the Society for Neuroscience, and then also a content editor and updater for the website. So I was like wearing many hats, trying to find times and advocate for UX projects. So if you're in a current role that you think has any capacity for improvement to its website, to its product, like see if you can get involved somehow, pitch an idea to someone because they may just let you do a little work on it, and that can be a project.
Yeah, and that can be very effective. Sometimes, if you can transition right within your company, right? It doesn't happen for most people, unfortunately, right? So it's really an exception, not the norm. But for some people, it could happen, and it does happen occasionally. If you can do that, that's the most efficient way usually, right? So it could be really, really nice and much faster also. And yeah. But overall, yeah, it's not an easy journey, right? It takes some time, especially now. But if you're truly interested in this field, if you truly feel like you're good at this, you will make it happen, right? Because these tough times, they also kind of filter out everyone who's been at that's kind of the advantage of a tough time, right? Like this is uh, some people were just trying to pursue it, UX as like a quick, okay, just go to a quick boot camp and get hired right away and just like make lots of money quickly, right? So the current market is much more difficult, right? So it basically filters out people who are truly interested in the field, truly passionate, and basically, yeah. So if you're one of those, just again, I'm never recommend to do something if you're not really interested in it, right? Because you don't want to kind of not enjoy, like 70% of your life, basically. Um, but if you are, definitely keep going, keep at it, right? Even in a tough market, it's an exciting time, right? Because based on some predictions, some research, right? So a lot of new AI projects and products coming up and coming out, and lots of new, basically the digitization keeps continuing, right? And all these new different platforms and tools and products and interfaces and like new like voice and AR, VR, etc. And like all the AI products will provide lots of opportunities. So keep at it, and we'll make it. So thank you so much, Mitchell. This was awesome. Hope you guys enjoyed the event and got some great insights. So, as promised, people often ask about the program that we run. So, again, as promised earlier, let me also quickly tell you about that since it may be a great opportunity for some of you to not only build a very strong real client portfolio and real work experience, but also get crucial soft skills like team collaboration, client management, and presentation, along with career prep to master UX job search and interviewing so you can actually land a UX role. So who this program is best for? It is best for ambitious people who know UX basics or come from a design, research, creative tech, or related background and look to transition into UX in one of the most effective and efficient ways and without quitting their current jobs or other commitments. We're also pretty selective and look for motivated and committed team players. So we ran lots of cohorts over several years and helped about 160 people transition into UX, become highly hireable, and land UX jobs. Alumni of the program have been hired by companies like SiriusXM, Coach, Google, ABC News, Meta, JP Morgan, many, many others. The accelerator was ranked by SwitchUp as a best UX program. So actually number one in 2025, this year. Well, last year, this year's ranking hasn't come out yet. And also featured in Fortune magazine and ADP list. And the advisors and mentors are also UX practitioners from companies like Google, IDEO, American Express, The Economist, and many others. So what you gain after completing the program is build and advance, not just hard, but the crucial soft skills, gain real experience, robust, real client, end-to-end case studies with digital products, expand your professional network, and master UX job search and interviewing so you can land a UX job. In fact, our grads have done so well that we do offer a money back guarantee. So you either land a UX job or get your tuition back plus an extra $500 on top of that. So if it sounds like you may be a good candidate, you can learn more on beginnings.com. The next cohort will be starting in early April. More detail will be shared on that later. Our cohorts are small and do fill up quickly, so please act soon. Otherwise, even if you're a great candidate, sometimes you may end up on the wait list because the cohorts are capped to a small size. Also, to thank everyone in our community who attended this event, you'll be eligible for a $500 tuition credit if accepted. To claim that credit, what you need to do is by tomorrow, request a free, no commitment career transition consultation where we'll do a first UX job hireability assessment for you. You'll see the link in the chat or can find it on the website in consultation section. And by the way, these sessions are designed to, this is definitely not just some kind of a program pitch or anything like that, right? So they're designed to do the following. We'll take a look at your background, skills, and experience. We'll identify what is possible for you to do to become a highly hireable UX job candidate and uncover the key bottlenecks restricting your UX career transition or advancement progress. And then we'll create a personalized action plan that will get you results. And also, we will see if you may be a good fit for our UX Career Accelerator program. So finally, I also want to mention that we frequently run different types of virtual events. So we'll keep you updated about upcoming events and share resources via email in our newsletter that is usually sent once a week or every couple of weeks or so. So thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to our wonderful guest for taking his time to join us and provide all the valuable insights. It was a huge pleasure to have you here. And by the way, Mitch, what is the Mitchell, if what is the best way for folks to who would like to connect to find you? Sorry,
Oh, you're
you probably
fine.
already already left.
I stayed at the office late today for this. No, you're good. Um, yeah, best ways just LinkedIn. I think Micah, you can post it in the chat. But yeah, just Mitchell Thomas on LinkedIn. Feel free to follow me, message me with any questions. Always glad to help everyone out.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Mitchell. Again, pleasure to have you here. Appreciate all the insights and thank you guys for joining us.